Well, good morning, everybody. Good to see you. I'm Robert Bemis. I work for the North Carolina Department of Natural and Cultural Resources, and in that capacity, I am the Historic Trades Interpretive Specialist, meaning that it's my responsibility to make sure that all the historic interpreters within the sites have historic trades knowledge available to them and training. So we're not only are we looking at the physical operation of tools, we're also looking at the history of who was operating these tools, who was doing the work, and trying to bring their experiences to public light. So now, in saying that, I've been involved in historic trades for about 20 years. Come at it from more of an artistic perspective than from a history perspective. And then I'll explain that real quick. To kind of qualify the whole thing, I grew up about 15 minutes from downtown Charlotte. So I was not born on a farm, so all these trade skills came about through just inquiry, the search for knowledge rather than practical experience. Now, in saying that, I have had a lot of practical experience since then. But the whole point here, the takeaway, is you don't have to be raised on a farm to know how to do all this. So historic trades is something that I find that over a period of time, if you find somebody who's reenacting, after a little while, they will want to make something. They'll want to figure out how to make something that they need rather than always having to depend on somebody else to purchase it. And they don't have to necessarily make everything. And usually people don't wind up learning how to make everything. They usually learn how to make one or two things really, really well. So
How do you know when you're at expert level? Like, how do you know? I think what the person was trying to ask is like, how do you know that you are ready to
you're
go
ready to do it.
start demonstrating these trades, right?
Sure. That's a wonderful question. That's something I deal with on a daily basis because what I find is that the vast majority of people that I have talked to, trained, interpreted with, there's a lot of what is it? There's a lot of imposter syndrome going around right now, where people just don't believe that they're good enough to tell other people, which is fine. Which is fine. I completely understand that. I think we all do. Um, what I find after all these years of doing this, I still don't know everything. You won't, unless you are that one or two special people who are the best at what you do. You're always going to be learning something. So that's kind of the quick way of saying, don't be afraid to demonstrate to people, because I think that this being scared there is thinking that you're going to be doing something, whatever the trade is, and someone's going to come up who knows more than you. That very well may happen. That's great. Look at that as a learning opportunity more so than as a failure on your part. We can't know everything. What I tell people is my experience is that I did not go through a proper apprenticeship with any trade that I've done, and I've done a lot. Never went through a proper apprenticeship, so I never had a master that I worked with. I've always use the analogy that my skill set is more akin to what a pretty typical farmer would have had in the 18th and 19th century. I know how to do a lot of things, and I more often than not, I try to solve problems more so than becoming an expert on one specific craft. So, for instance, just like a tradesman would have, or a farmer would have, more to say, is if I see a fence and it's broken, um, I'm looking at two or three different ways that it can be fixed. Now, do I feel confident in my abilities to do that? Yes, because I've done it a lot. So now we've learned a few things. To answer your question, do what you're doing a lot, get good at it. Research what you're doing for the particular time period a lot so that you can talk about it. Talk about it. Seriously, I mean, I hate to say this, but I've got a family that I've been abusing for years by talking to them ad nauseum about every little thing I'm doing. I can't tell you how many times I've drugged my wife out into the garage and said, "Hey, look at this cool piece of wood." She doesn't care, but I'm talking about it. And I'm using her as an example of an audience that I would then have. And it really kind of depends on what you want to do as well. So let's take that question from two perspectives. What's your end goal? Is your end goal simple education? Do you want to be the person who goes to a site, who goes to an event, who goes wherever and teaches the public, who demonstrates to the public? Or do you want to be a sutler? Is your end goal to sell what you're making? Now, I don't do a lot of that. I do a little bit here and there, but the vast majority of what I do has to do with public tutelage, with teaching people what I'm doing. So whenever you're teaching people what you're doing, what you generally find is that you're never going to expect to finish what you could do when you were alone. So plan for that. Now, I'm sorry if I'm rambling, but a lot of things are coming to mind right now. I've got a lot to say and I only got about 50 more minutes to say it. So let's say, let's just use carpentry. Carpentry is an easy one. All right, so I've got a draw bench set up at a historic site. I've talked to the historic site. I've asked, they either contacted me or I've contacted them and said, you have an event, what would you like me to do? Or you have an event, these are the available slots, you're going to choose one. So let's just say that you've already chosen and they've helped you choose what you're going to do. You're sitting down at the draw bench. You're going to make some chair legs. All right, you're going to use a draw knife and you're going to chamfer down some wood and make some chair legs. Let's just say that's what you're going to do. So if you were sitting by yourself in your backyard, in your garage, wherever, and you were working on those, you could get those done fairly easily. You could do 4 chair legs in less than an hour, I have no doubt. If you're sitting and you're talking to the public, you're going to get 1 chair leg done in 3 hours. Why is this? Because people are going to come up and they're going to want you to explain the process. This is where you have to feel comfortable. This is the important part about interpretive trades is that the actual work is sometimes secondary, because you have to understand that you're not going to get it done. Your job there is not so much to produce the item, more so that it is to tell people about the production methods. So if I'm sitting and I'm chamfering a piece of wood and I'm working with a draw knife, I have to understand that about every 4 or 5 minutes, I'm going to put that draw knife down and I'm going to have to fully turn my attention to the person who's interested so I can address their questions. Now, here's where the studying comes in. This is nothing that you have to know through practical experience. This has to come from knowing what you're doing. So do I feel comfortable, rhetorically speaking, do I feel comfortable explaining to somebody what I'm doing? If you do, that's great. If you don't, talk to yourself, talk to your family, go to a site and work with somebody who knows how to do something, have them work and you talk and develop that rapport there. That's often the hard part. I find that actually learning the trade is not nearly as difficult as learning how to communicate with people what the trade is about. I know some really, really brilliant craftsmen who aren't great teachers. And I know some really great teachers that aren't great craftsmen, and finding that middle ground there, that's the hard part. So if you can kind of distinguish where your skill set is, if you're a great craftsman, you need to learn how to talk a little bit better, do that. If you're a great talker, you need to learn how to do a trade a little bit better, something you're interested in, you see your area of concentration, work on it. The short answer there is when you feel confident. Once again, if you're working through a site, which I do 99% of the time, you're going to have built-in tutelage there. You're going to have somebody on site, maybe, I say that, but there's usually ways to have some help. They're not going to throw you at something that you're not ready for. I guess that's a better way of putting it.
Let's back up a little bit
Sure.
and talk about the ways that you can be a demonstrator, right?
Sure.
So like, are you volunteering for a site? Because if you're employed by a site, the site is going to be navigating that for you, essentially.
Exactly.
Right? For the most part, that's going to be something you're hired, and that stuff's kind of talked about. So this would be more like, okay, well, I want to go be a volunteer for a site. What should I know first? What's going to happen? And then also as like reenactors, right? And are there other things that I'm forgetting and missing here?
No, I mean, you're for our purposes today. I mean, we're looking at two entities. We're looking at people who work with sites and people who go to reenactments, and there's a lot of overlap there. But the sutlering is a whole different thing. That gets into a business end of it. You'll know when you're prepared to do that. That's usually much higher end. You very rarely start out with a new trade and then immediately start selling it. So we're just going to talk interpretation for this purpose. So if you are going to a site, if you're going to just an event and you're looking for a trade to do, the best thing to do, the thing that I like to do, is see what's necessary, see what was done and what's necessary. Go and see what's not being done. So we'll take a military perspective, because I know a lot of people do military. there are a number of events that need fortifications, be it, ersatz fortifications, be it something something that was a little bit more permanent. Go bring a period axe, bring a period saw, bring a bow saw, bring something, and begin to make those, rather than sitting in camp and sitting around the fire and not doing anything and dreaming, oh, I wish I knew a trade skill. Find the thing that's necessary. Find it at an event, even if you're not doing it at the event, identify it, and then learn about it later on. So, I mean, this could open up a whole number of different questions. So for instance, let's say I'm in an event and I'm sitting there and I realized that I needed to build a lean-to. Pretty simple, just a basic shelter, lean-to. So that begs a lot of questions. How do they build it? All right. With what did they build it? When did they build it? What materials were available? Were they carrying materials that would be useful for building this without having to gather materials? Real simple questions right off the bat that you can then look into. And so next time you go to an event, prepare for that. Say to your fellows, hey, your group, say, let's build lean-tos this time. I've done some research. This is how you do it. I'll bring these tools. Or do you guys have access to these tools? Do you know where to get them? Do you know how to make them? That kind of thing. That opens up a whole new ball game there. And then let's spend some time putting this together. The big thing there is don't wait for people to teach you a trade. Go learn the trade. So, when it comes to not feeling confident in your ability to teach a trade, what I would suggest is try it and fail forward. You're never going to get it right the first time. You won't. That's fine, because you'll learn from that experience. Your program, your pattern, your engagement with the public, it will change over time. It's just like, when I was in art school many, many years ago, and the common thought was that, and you see this amongst just general people, is that, oh, I don't have the ability to draw. You're not born with that. You're not born with the ability to make a great cabinet. You're not born with the ability to blacksmith a wonderful thing. You learn. And you're often not born with the ability to communicate to the public, period. You learn how to do these things. And so I would suggest is that even if you don't feel confident enough to go out and do it. Just go do it. And if you don't do great, it's okay. You're not getting graded, just go back and do it again, learn from your mistakes.
Let's tap into reenacting, since you brought that up, and let's talk about some things from the women's perspective, because we have a lot more female members who are in, not that matters, but interpreting women's work and women's
I'm glad you said that. You know why? Because there is no women's work. You have labeled something that doesn't exist. Women's work is all work. There is no like, this is a woman's job, this is a guy's job. Yes. If it had to get done, it had to get done. I get that a lot. I teach blacksmithing and at a place here in Raleigh. And that's always one of the, every class, I get a lady or two, and they're, I bet you don't get a lot of ladies. Every class, this was not something that men did. This was not something the ladies did. This is something that was non-gender specific. Everybody did it. So, as ladies, if you have a lot of ladies in the organization, which I know you do, identify something and do it. There's no reason whatsoever that you could not be a carpenter, that you do not know joinery. Just off the top of my head, thinking of a lot of the historic sites that offer really good interpretive joinery, Old Salem and Williamsburg, ladies are doing both of those to an incredibly high level. Very, very good. So, I think that's one thing to get over, is that when you think about reenacting as a lady, then you often fall into camp follower. That's the first place to go. So what am I going to do? And I find that to be a little limiting. Don't think of yourself as a camp follower. Think of yourself as a person who is following camp. Does that make a little bit more sense? So let's say that we'll go ahead and say, just for the sake of argument, that you, the lady, is there with her husband and maybe your child. So the husband is now in the military. You are a camp follower. So here's a discussion that you have at your house prior to going to the event. This is something that my wife and I, a discussion we had many, many years ago. what did we do before we were in the military? So what was our craft skill? What was our trade? These were trades that were absolutely necessary in the 18th century military. The person who was a cordwain or cobbler, not the same, but they would take that skill set and they would utilize it within a military function. The carpenter, absolutely necessary. The blacksmith, absolutely necessary. These were people who could then take that trade and move on. So if you want to do some really interesting interpretation, figure that out. Figure out what you did. Where does your interest lie? We were farmers. Well, that's a great one because farmers bring a lot to the table. There's a giant skill set there that you would then have in camp. So if you've decided that you are a military family, that you come from a military family and you're a camp follower, what did you do prior? Utilize that. Okay, I was a farmer's wife. Well, farmers' wives didn't just sit in the house all day long and do nothing. They had a lot of responsibilities. Delve into those responsibilities, figure out what skill sets were necessary to run a farm. What would I need to know how to do? Basic woodworking, basic blacksmithing, basic animal husbandry, what time of the year crops come in, and I only say that because I've been really weirdly into wheat recently. I don't know, fallen down a wheat rabbit hole. But the knowledge of that and how to take processed grains and turn that into breadstuffs, both with or without an oven, build an oven, things along those lines. Work within your unit to identify what could be done, what was done, what was known by the individuals who were in that setting. I primarily do English, British military. And so, most of my research has gone that way. When you look at the colonial army, then I don't want to say it was more so, but this is a quick army. This was an army that just recently came about, especially in a militia unit. These were people that that's not their full-time gig. They're looking at a battle saying, I got to go back home and get the grain in. I mean, it's a good excuse. Utilize that as a platform to launch yourself so that you can look at what the actual people of the time, what their skill sets were, and to develop that skill set with you.
What do you, as a longtime reenactor, and then now, this is your profession, what do you feel like is missing at a lot of events when it comes to displaying these things in an interpretive way as reenactors, especially maybe not so much. I mean, you could include what's missing on the military men's side of it, but what do you feel like women in camp could be doing more of that we're not seeing?
Sure. Everything else, right? And that's not just women, but that's men as well. Just in the experience of reenacting, 20-ish years that I've had, is that, and this is no slight to anybody, this is just how it is that if you have an event, the battle is the focus. That's just how it is. That's what gets boots on the ground. That's what gets reenactors to show up. That's also what gets the public to show up, which is fine. That's just it's part of it. But you wake up in the morning, you do your thing, you wait around until the unit gets prepared. They march off, they do the battle, they come back, 5 o'clock, it's over. The site may have some programming going on. There may be 2 battles where you have a lunch in between. That's all well and good. You can leave it at that. That's an enjoyable experience. A lot of people are fine with that. Heck, I'm fine with that for some events. The nuance comes when those spaces that we fill as modern individuals, when you wake up in the morning, what are you going to do? You cook breakfast, make coffee, drink tea, things along those lines. So if your interests lie there, begin to develop that, not only I guess, I've heard to a certain extent that can be considered a trade, but it's a stretch. But begin to consider those downtimes. What was happening then? That's where the research comes into it. So has the event, have they given you firewood? Yeah, sure, they gave you firewood. But do you want to go out to a little copse of trees with your axe after getting permission and begin to fell that? It's green, so it's not going to do anything, but it's kind of going to give you a good interpretive explanation. This is something we would have done. We could take it back. Here's wood we're going to burn. We can make the lean-to. There's a lot of things that were being done around the camp that aren't necessarily done now. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that these were things that were being done around camps that were semi semi permanent. You know, there was a lot of movement, obviously, but whenever you got to a place where you were going to camp, you made camp. There was a lot of, you know, things going up. Tents were going up. This was going up. A lot of stuff was happening. Um, you have those resources. You know, you look at the historic record and you can find out what people were doing. One of my absolute favorite images. Love this one for years. It's actually, it's right between the French Revolution and the early Napoleonic Wars. And it's a British wagon. It's a regimental wagon, and it's chock full of stuff. There's soldiers laying on it. There's women, wives, and hanging on it. There's kids on it. There's just a ton of stuff. And you look at that, and you immediately realize that this is the back of an entire regiment's car. You know, this is the trunks of everybody's car. There's a lot of cool stuff there. What can we do with that? That's what they would have stopped. They would have taken everything off, and they would have set up camp and done things. So specifically, you know, that's kind of hard to say. There's a lot going on there. There's a lot to do, you know. That would really depend on the person. I mean, if you're looking for, you know, actual ideas, it'd be kind of hard to give you a lot, because there's a lot there. The thing about reenacting is that, especially when it comes to trades or trade skills, I guess is a better way of putting it for just a proper reenactment, is there are things that we as modern individuals take for granted that historically they didn't. And I'll give you the one that comes to mind right off the top of my head is porta potties. You know, we take those for granted right away. Hey, you know, as a person who's had to put on quite a few reenactments, you know, the number of porta potties is very, very important. I see a lot of head shaking out there. What did they use? You know, were they digging latrines, blah, blah, blah. Now, see, here's the thing. I don't expect, nor would I particularly want, a whole bunch of people to show up and start digging latrines at my site. Understood. But that's where that kind of begs the big question, is that as an individual, are you looking for something to do, or are you looking for something to interpret? Because those are two vastly different things. If I'm looking for something to do, there's all kinds of things to do. I can busy myself by preparing food or gathering firewood, whatever. If I'm looking to interpret, then you've opened up a bigger box here, because I can talk to the public about the building of latrines and why those were important, and why ammonia is important, and what you can do with ammonia from a latrine, and why you could have separate latrines, and, you know, begin to get into, and that's a really, strangely, that's actually a really fun talk, because kids love bodily functions. You will keep a crowd with that talk. And so, you know, there's the thing is, you know, do you now want to talk about something, or do you want to actually do something? And there's a lot of crossover there as well. Now, I'm a talker by nature. There's something about my own voice that I love hearing. So I'm the fellow who have no problem whatsoever with standing in front of a crowd and talking about something that has nothing to do with military in a military uniform. Things just like that. I have given that latrine talk before many times, because I love it. I love the idea of, you know, what are you not seeing? What's missing here? You know, food was rationed. How is it rationed? If food was rationed and this is what you got, where did everything else come from? If we only had a limited pound of this, 3/4 of a pound of that, of protein, where else is protein being gathered? What military? You know, the British military, you were given stuff. The American military, yeah, too, you know, it's a little bit different. Who's paying for all this? You know, these are great interpretive tools that you can use. Now, if you're just looking to keep busy while you're in an event, there's a whole bunch of stuff you can do. I mean, everybody needs sewing done. You know? Identify what's missing, and then identify what you love. So, you know, I'll go back. I know I kind of set it offhandedly as a joke, but a few weeks ago, it was actually kind of a funny story. I was sweeping, and then wheat production popped in my head, and I fell down a rabbit hole with wheat. So where does that culminate? Well, this is coming from somebody who is a professional historic interpretive tradesperson, but also, you know, a reenactor. As of yesterday, I started volunteering at a local grist mill. because I want to know how to do this, right? I don't know the ins and outs of, I could talk to you about the grist mill itself. I could talk to you about how the water wheel, whether it's overshot or whatnot, and why that works and how it works. I could talk about how some of the machinery was made. I could talk about how, you know, the exterior of the walls, how some of the bricks or the stones were done. But the actual process of milling, I don't know. So what did I do? I do what I tell everybody to do. Don't sit around waiting for somebody to tell you how to do it. Go figure out how to do it on your own. And that is the biggest piece of advice. I've never at all minded, teaching somebody what I know how to do. What I have minded is them not asking. You know, I really like it when people ask me, and then I'd be more than happy to tell you everything. So I'm really a teach you how to fish more so than give you a fish. Hey, period fishing. If there's a lake around, everybody loves period fishing. That's a really cool thing to do. So there you go.
We'll change gears just a little bit away from reenacting. That's a lot of really good information. So let's say you live somewhere, there's a historic site, you're interested in demonstrating something of whatever that time period of that site is. So as the expert and the professional here, what's your advice for someone to get kind of like, just reach out to the site, let them know what you're interested in? Because I mean, most sites, maybe some of the larger ones have more restrictions about volunteers, but most small sites will always welcome volunteers, even if they have sort of like a train, where you fall under our guise of things. But yeah,
Well,
talk a bit about that.
I'll tell you from experience, because I actually just got through doing this, and I'm 20-year professional and I still call sites and volunteer, I love doing it. Just simply call, pick up the phone and call. The vast majority of sites either have a volunteer coordinator or somebody acting as a volunteer coordinator. This is the person you'll want to contact. You'll tell them what you're interested in. There's always some kind of paperwork, fill that out. You will speak to that person about what they expect and what you expect. And when I was a volunteer coordinator, it's a two-way street. I'm utilizing the volunteer for manpower, woman power. I'm utilizing it for, to make my staff that much more robust. But I also feel like I need to offer, oh, excuse me. I was out woodworking earlier and I've got sawdust in my face. Whew. But it's pervasive. But sorry about that. But I also feel like I need to offer them something, so I can't more often than not pay them monetarily, but I can pay them in experience. And so let's just use, milling. I want to know how to mill, so I called up a grist mill. If you want to know how to woodwork, if you want to know how to blacksmith, that's going to be a little bit easier because a grist mill is a grist mill, but there's going to be any number of sites that are going to have period appropriate trades that are available. And a lot of them, just off the top of my head, the ones that I'm thinking of in the North Carolina area also have a lot of the tool sets, or they have access to a tool lending library that they can then utilize to get the tools for what you need. So let's say you want to learn how to build a log cabin. That's a great one. I mean, that's a skill that a lot of people don't have today, that a lot of people had it at one point in time, just, basically working along. How do you do that? I mean, we grew up with Lincoln logs, at least I did. I don't even know if you have Lincoln logs anymore, it doesn't matter. But the fit of a Lincoln log is pretty darn close to the fit of a proper log cabin, strangely enough. So if you were to go to a site and say to them, hey, I'd love to learn how to build a log cabin, depending on the site, depending on where you are, they're either going to be overjoyed that you want to learn that skill, or, and this is really important, they're going to say, nah, log cabins really aren't what we're doing, but how about you go to this place? I used to do that a lot. I would say, we don't really do that, but if you went to this museum, that might be the thing they're looking for. So what I think that you can see a common theme here is identify the interest and then pursue the interest. And really the best thing to do is, in pursuing the interest, just call. I mean, there are very few trade skills that somebody isn't doing. And quite honestly, right now, I mean, we're lucky in that all you really need is a Google search, and you can probably find a a group within your area that is doing something. There are a lot of trades groups around right now. I mean, I belong to quite a few of them: woodworking, wood turning, blacksmithing. And this is a great source of information as well. Just identify what you want to do and then call and ask. No one ever, and I can't think of a museum that is turning away volunteers right now. I mean, it's absolutely necessary. So
It's just kind of intimidating if you're just coming in, and
it can be.
there's a lot of things to figure out, and you're like, I don't even, what's the thing that I even wanna, like, I want to interpret, but I don't even know what I want to interpret, and what's not being done. And yeah, there's
And
always.
the thing is it's hard to identify what's not being done if you don't know what people are doing. And so, what I mean by that is, let's say you show up to a site. The one that I have in mind right now is, let's use the Vance birthplace, which I'm doing a project with them right now. Wonderful, wonderful site. They've got a lot there, whole lot there. But if you show up and you don't know what you're looking at, if you don't know what the day-to-day life of a mid 19th century individual was like, then it's going to be hard for you to identify what is necessary, what's needed. So what I would suggest is, if you are, well, and I'll qualify this by saying that most people who are interested in getting into period or historic trade skills are people who are already invested in the time period. So very rarely do you start reenacting and say, hey, I really want to be a cordwain. Usually you start in the 18th century. Hey, I've got an interest in 18th century living history. And then you kind of develop, oh, I want to be this. Um, Once you've identified the time period, once you've identified what they're doing, and usually you kind of get a good idea of what people are doing, then that's going to help you kind of pare down what you want to do. I brought up that I don't like sewing a little while ago. Now, 15 years ago, I love sewing. I sewed all the time. My glasses just kept getting thicker. And so it's difficult for me to do right now. I'm a big motion person. I like hitting things. And so that's where I tend to go that way. I had to identify that, just as like I'm telling people to identify what you want to do. And then I had to go that direction myself. Um, Now, I was a strange situation in that I was lucky enough to be in the profession. And so very rarely did I have to seek somebody out and say, I need to learn how to do this. More so than, because of my career path, it was this 19th century house is falling down, the shutters are falling off. We need to figure out how to fix it. And so I did. I'd have to figure out how to fix it in a period appropriate manner, which was great. It was wonderful. There's some really bad shutter dogs out there right now that probably need to be replaced. Fail forward, right? Um, but yeah, I would suggest the biggest piece of advice that I give to people who are, and I know that this is the beginner's guide, who are just entering, is feel comfortable with the time period and seek out those who've been doing it for a while. Don't worry about people doing it better than you. I guarantee you, I've been doing this a long time, and there are plenty of people who are much more adept at every trade skill I know. But that's great, because then there's all, the fellow who taught me how to blacksmith, he once told me that every blacksmith he'd ever met, had they been blacksmithing a day or 50 years, he always learned something from them. And that's exactly what you would do. You're never going to be the best. There's always something to learn, and the way that I look at it, it's always not, I've never really seen it as a competition that I'm having with other people, more so than a competition I'm having with myself. Every day, because of you, Kendall, I make Instagram posts every once in a while. And I just made one that's always been a very important saying to me is not practice makes perfect, but practice makes better. And I firmly believe that. So yeah, just seek it out. And also, and this is because this is part of my profession, I'd be more than happy to do this. If anybody has any questions about North Carolina State historic sites and ones that might help you, I'd be happy for you to put up my email address, and I'll answer any questions necessary. I'd be happy to do that. So,
How do juried events work?
well, for the beginner's guide in the 18th century, let's kind of pose the question: what is a juried event? Juried events. These are events that have either a small group or a big group of people that look at your impression and have rules already dictated, usually according to the event, that you have to adhere to. So usually what you're finding is that material culture standards are very high, very good. That if you're portraying a craftsman, that every tool has to be a tool that would have been utilized at that time period, depending on what time period you're talking about. Even to the point where if it's, let's say 18th century, sometimes 1740s and 1790s, things change. You have to have documentation, you have to have everything spick and span and be producing something that is appropriate to the time period. Now, that sounds like a lot. It can be, it can be. But if you're just starting out with trades or historic reenacting, what I would suggest is don't look at that as your entry level, look at that as your goal. So if you're starting out with, you found some period boxes you really want to make. A project I'm working on right now, great example. Let's say I'm going to make an 18th century sea chest for a sailor, okay? If you were doing this at a juried event, every tool, be it the mortise and tenon saws, your chisels, your hammers, your mallets, everything is going to have to be 18th century period appropriate according to the time period. And specifically for this one is 1771. That's big. That's a lot. That can be pretty daunting to somebody who's just starting out with the trade skill. If you're doing this in your garage, then your modern mortise and tenon joint, or excuse me, your dovetail saw could be a modern saw. You know, for instance, I'm using a modern saw here. I would not use that at a juried event. Juried events are fantastic. They're absolutely wonderful. There's a few that I can think of right now that Fort Frederick Market Fair is juried, I believe. And I know that Fort Dobbs here in North Carolina, they do some juried events that are wonderful. If you want to go and really get some inspiration as to what you can do, not necessarily what you need to start doing, but what you can do, I would totally suggest going to these. You see some super high-end craftsmen who are doing some absolutely marvelous work. You know, some of the guys that I really look up to in my field, they go to juried events. They're fabulous. But they can be scary. They can be very scary. Not only can they be scary because you'll then get, you know, that whole imposter syndrome that we talked about earlier. You'll feel like I'm not good enough to do this. You're fine, because you remember once again that they started somewhere just like you did. And also, you know, we have to be realistic about this. If it's historic, it's usually more expensive than the modern version. So like a historic saw is much more expensive than going down to Lowe's and picking up a craftsman saw. But you know, if you're into it and that's your interest and that's your hobby, there you go. So, you know, yeah, juried events, wonderful. But like I said, that's your goal. That's not your start. So.
I think we've covered a lot, unless anybody has another question. And then I think, of course, people are going to be watching the replay of this and they'll have your contact information.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And notes, which is great.
Well, it's been awesome. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
And so like fun. I said, if anybody has any questions or if anybody needs further contact,
yeah.
You have my email address, my work email address, so it'll be official.